All right, dive time. We're back, and we are digging into some new source material today.
Yep, ready when you are.
Our focus, the Sean P. Diddy Combs trial. We're really zeroing in on what reportedly went down on day 16.
Right, and we're working from a pretty detailed YouTube report here, looking at the testimony, the court proceedings from that day.
Exactly. So think of this as us helping you unpack the really complex stuff from day 16. Our mission really is to highlight the key moments from the testimony, the evidence presented.
Based on what our source is reporting, yeah. And what it might all mean, for the arguments both sides are trying to make.
And this source makes day 16 sound absolutely packed, like really intense.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, surprising claims, some interesting courtroom strategy, and some really technical evidence, too. Okay, let's unpack it.
Sounds good. Where do we start?
Well, our source actually kicks off its day 16 coverage with a quick look back, a recap of day 15 to set the stage.
Okay, makes sense.
So one big piece was testimony from Eddie Garcia. He's a former security guard, Intercontinental Hotel in L.A., and interestingly, testifying under immunity.
Immunity. That always flags something potentially significant, doesn't it?
It does. And Garcia's testimony, according to this report, it was all about that 2016 incident, the one at the hotel involving Mr. Combs and Cassie Ventura that, has been widely reported.
Right, the video.
Exactly. And the huge claim here, the really big one, is Garcia testifying that Mr. Combs offered him $100,000 for the surveillance footage.
Wow, $100,000 just for
Yeah.
the tapes.
That's the claim. And Garcia also mentioned that Mr. Combs' team wanted a copy of his ID.
Okay, so an alleged offer of money and a request for ID. How did the prosecution connect those dots?
Well, this is where they reportedly brought in other evidence. They showed that Diddy's former assistant, KK, Christina Karam,
Okay.
had confiscated phones. And apparently on those phones, Garcia's name, his number, and photos of the exact IDs that Combs' team had supposedly asked for.
Ah, okay. So they're trying to tie it all together.
Exactly. The prosecution, based on our source, presented this as evidence of an attempted cover-up.
Right. It fits that narrative, doesn't it? I mean, why else would you need photos of the guard's ID and offer that kind of money? Unless, you were trying to control the evidence, maybe suppress it.
Makes sense.
And the immunity part reinforces that. It suggests the prosecution sees Garcia's account as really important, maybe indicating he witnessed or was even involved in actions they see as, like, obstructing justice. It feeds into their larger argument about Mr. Combs allegedly running a kind of criminal enterprise that involves silencing people, hiding things.
Okay, so that's the prosecution's angle from day 15. But the defense had their turn, too.
Of course.
Our source points to testimony from Derek Ferguson, former CFO of Bad Boy Entertainment. And his testimony sounds like it was meant to paint a completely different picture.
Let me guess. Focused on the business side.
Pretty much. Ferguson reportedly denied seeing Mr. Combs, or anyone around him really, commit crimes, use violence, coercion, or SA for business gain.
Okay.
Said he never saw prostitution used. Talked about Combs having a strong work ethic, big goals, driven entrepreneur.
Right. Portraying him as a legitimate, focused businessman makes sense as a defense strategy.
There was apparently a moment during his testimony. It was described as, well, less clear-cut.
Oh.
When he was asked if he thought highly of Mr. Combs, our source says Ferguson paused, like a noticeable pause, then replied, I don't know how to respond to that.
Oof. Yeah, that kind of silence or that kind of response, it can speak volumes in a courtroom, can't it?
Absolutely. And then the prosecution seemed to jump on that, trying to undermine his testimony using financial records.
Follow the money.
Exactly. They apparently showed a 2011 bank statement from Bad Boy.
What?
It showed a $20,000 wire transfer to Cassie Ventura. Then, just a few weeks later, a matching $20,000 transfer back to Bad Boy, but this time from her father.
20,000 out, 20,000 back in from family. What's the alleged connection?
Well, our source ties this specific transaction to other testimony, where Mr. Combs allegedly threatened to release an S-tape if Cassie's family didn't return some money.
Seriously?
Yeah, and apparently her mother had to take out a home equity loan to get that $20,000 back to them.
Wow. Okay, so the prosecution isn't just showing a transaction. They're layering it with allegations of threats, coercion, using the company's own finances to suggest something very different from the CFO's picture of a clean operation.
Seems like it. Using the records to contradict the testimony.
Precisely. It's about showing the jury, look, here's a potential pattern. Here are financial actions that, according to us, support claims of coercion or hush money, going way beyond just normal business.
Okay, so that sets the stage. Now, day 16 proper. Before the jury even gets seated, our source describes some really significant legal arguments happening.
The pre-game strategy session, basically.
Kind of. And one big request from the prosecution, they wanted to bring back their expert witness, Dr. Don Hughes.
Okay, Dr. Hughes. Why bring him back? What prompted that?
It seems it was a direct reaction to something the defense did earlier. When they were cross-examining a former assistant, Mia,
Right.
the defense lawyers apparently tried to imply she wasn't credible, that she must be lying because she sent Mr. Combs, like, loving messages and stayed involved with him after the time she claims the abuse happened.
Okay. The classic, why did you stay? Or why were you nice to him if he was abusing you?
Yeah.
Line of questioning.
Exactly that. And the prosecution wants Dr. Hughes, who's an expert on trauma and abuse dynamics.
Right. Coercive control, trauma bonding, that sort of thing.
Yes. They want him to explain why that behavior, staying, feeling trapped, maybe confused, even showing affection sometimes, can actually be totally consistent with what victims of coercive control or abuse experience.
It's counterintuitive to people who haven't experienced it or studied it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Abuse is often complex, mixing fear with these really complicated emotional ties. It's not always just constant negativity.
So Dr. Hughes wouldn't be saying, yes, this specific person was abused, but more like explaining the general psychology.
Exactly. That's typically the role of an expert like him in this situation. Provide the framework, the psychological context, general patterns of behavior in abuse situations, so the jury can then use that information to evaluate the witness's specific testimony and behavior. It's basically to counter the defense's implication that her actions somehow disprove the abuse.
And our source mentioned something about a recent court decision backing this up.
Yeah, apparently there was a recent appeals court decision, U.S. versus Larry Ray, Second Circuit, and it basically affirmed that this type of expert testimony from Dr. Hughes is legitimate. It's helpful for juries and trials involving these kinds of abuse allegations. So that precedent likely strengthened the prosecution's request here.
Interesting. Shows how legal stuff is always evolving. What else happened before testimony started?
A couple of other things mentioned. The defense apparently wanted to show Cassie's album art for her Love a Loser video.
Why? What was the point?
Presumably to argue it showed her independence, maybe something about the nature of her relationship with Combs, through her art. But the judge apparently questioned its probative value.
Meaning, like, how relevant it actually is to proving anything in the case.
Exactly. Does it really prove or disprove the core legal issues? The judge didn't allow the art itself as exhibits, but apparently said the defense could ask the witness about it.
Gotcha. And there was also talk about ketamine use, evidence of a witness taking it with Combs and Cassie.
Right. The defense wanted to introduce that, arguing it showed Mr. Combs found it whack or disapproved. They felt that was relevant to his state of mind about drug use.
And the judge allowed that specific point.
Yes, ruled it admissible, saying it could go towards his state of mind. So you see these smaller skirmishes over exactly what evidence the jury gets to see and hear. Lots of strategy.
Okay, let's get to the actual testimony now. Day 16. A key witness was Frank Piazza, described as a legal audio and video expert.
Yeah, and with all the talk about that 2016 hotel video, his testimony sounds critical.
Definitely. He was qualified as an expert, apparently testified loads of times before, SDNY, places like that. Charges quite a bit too. Source said $295 an hour.
Okay, so a seasoned pro. What was the core of his testimony?
All about analyzing those videos, the surveillance footage and cell phone clips related to that alleged 2016 incident.
And what did he find? Did the video show what's been alleged?
He testified it did, specifically that the surveillance video showed Mr. Combs kicking Cassie on the ground.
Okay, so confirmation from the expert about that specific act.
Yes, but he also acknowledged technical issues with the hotel system.
Glitches. Like what?
Things like the system played back faster than real time, like 22 frames per second instead of the standard 30. So it needed software correction for timing.
Okay, that sounds fixable, though.
Right. But also video stream corruption, he called it, caused distortion in parts, described almost like a ghost of a person. And because it was motion activated, you could get timestamp jumps, maybe missing seconds here and there.
So, not a perfect system by any means. Defense would love those details.
Yeah.
But what was Piazza's overall conclusion about the videos, despite the glitches?
His conclusion, his professional opinion based on the analysis, was that the videos themselves were accurate. They depicted the events as they happened.
Meaning they hadn't been, like, digitally altered or faked?
Correct. He testified they weren't altered. The glitches were in the recording or the playback, not the actual content of what was recorded.
Got it. The underlying visual record was sound, in his view. Did he present the video,
Yeah, he apparently put together a compilation for the prosecution.
combining different angles?
Exactly, showing the sequence from different cameras, using black screens in between, just to make the timeline clear for the jury.
And did he describe what was in that compilation?
He did. Walked the jury through it, described seeing a male figure running down the hall, throwing a female figure down, dragging her,
Yeah.
while holding something that looked like a glowing cell phone in a bag.
Dragging her. Wow.
Yeah. Then picking up and throwing an object looked like a vase at the female figure. Later, the female figure shows up with a duffel bag, security comes out, and then the male figure, identified as Combs, walks away holding a cell phone to his ear. Piazza testified that compilation accurately showed what was on the original footage.
That sounds pretty damning if the jury believes his analysis.
The source also mentioned briefly some other videos, SCEX videos.
Yeah. What were those?
Described as explicit videos, recovered from a user named Frank Black via Ms. Ventura's device. Apparently they're under seal, so not public, but Piazza testified he enhanced the audio on them.
Okay, so more technical work on potentially sensitive material.
Yeah.
So summing up Piazza's testimony, what's the big takeaway here?
Well, it seems like the main point is that, according to the prosecution's expert, the video evidence backs up key parts of the allegations, especially the kicking incident.
Right. And while there were technical issues with the recording system, which the defense could definitely lash onto,
Which they did.
Piazza maintained the footage itself was accurate and unaltered. So it's about grounding the claims in visual evidence, despite imperfections in how it was captured.
Okay, speaking of the defense latching on to things, let's talk about the cross-examination. Attorney Tiny Jarrus cross-examined Piazza.
And how did that go? Aggressive.
Described as having a very different tone, yeah. Almost a thundering voice compared to other defense lawyers, the source noted. Her goal seemed pretty clear: cast doubt on the video evidence.
How did she try to do that?
Question the source, like exactly how did he get these videos? Pushed him on that. She also brought up his own notes, where he apparently called the surveillance system cheap, quote, in a way.
Ooh, using his own words against him. Classic cross-exam tactic. Highlight anything suggesting the source isn't reliable.
Exactly, and she really hammered on those technical glitches you mentioned.
The missing minutes. The timestamp jumps.
Yep. Describing the system as constantly playing catch-up because the motion activation caused these jumps. The implication being, well, if there are gaps, if the timing is weird, can you really be sure you saw everything accurately?
Raising reasonable doubt about completeness. Makes sense.
She also brought up that ghost figure distortion Piazza had mentioned.
Right, the glitch.
She pointed out it wasn't visible in a cell phone video that apparently captured the same scene.
Okay, suggesting an inconsistency between different video sources.
Seems like it. Piazza's explanation was apparently that the cell phone quality was too low to show that specific kind of distortion, but Jarrus definitely emphasized that it wasn't there in the cell video.
So hitting inconsistencies, hitting the cheap system comment, hitting the time gaps, the defense strategy seems pretty clear. Just plant seeds of doubt. Make the jury question just how reliable and accurate those videos truly are.
Exactly. Okay, let's move on. Because after the technical expert, the source describes testimony from what it calls a highly anticipated witness, Brianna Bangolan, also known as Banner.
Okay, and why highly anticipated?
Because her core claim is just, well, it's incredibly shocking.
What is it?
She alleged, under oath, that Mr. Combs held her over a 17-story balcony.
Whoa. Held her over a 17-story balcony.
That's the allegation. Just terrifying to even think about. She also talked about ongoing effects like night terrors.
I can imagine. Did she talk about her relationship with Cassie?
She did. Said they'd been friends since 2013. Described Cassie's relationship with Mr. Combs as volatile.
Okay, so framing that dynamic. Did her testimony include other alleged incidents too?
Yes, it seemed like she was painting a broader picture, according to the source. She testified about, one time, April 2016, Combs texted Cassie a list of places she and Bangolan had just been.
Like tracking them.
That's how Bangolan said it felt. She testified feeling like, oh my God, he knows where we've been, like surveillance.
Creepy. What else?
She also described an incident, Combs allegedly banging on the door, entering Cassie's place, throwing a knife at Cassie.
Through a night?
Yeah, and then Cassie apparently threw it back. Bangolan said she was scared, didn't remember if drugs were involved right then, didn't call the police, but she said she later saw injuries on Cassie via FaceTime.
Okay, so allegations of surveillance, potential violence.
Right.
What about drugs? Was that part of her testimony?
A very significant part, it sounds like. She testified about using drugs with Cassie marijuana, ketamine, cocaine, oxy pills. She even said she sometimes sold drugs to Cassie and others.
Wow, okay, so open about drug use.
Mary said they tried to get sober together, too. And she mentioned one instance where Mr. Combs allegedly provided drugs. She called it G.
And did she allege any direct threats from Combs towards her?
Yes, a very serious one. She claimed that in April 2016 at a photo shoot, he got right up close to her face and said, "I am the devil, I would unalive you."
Unalive you. A direct threat.
Yeah, she reportedly sobbed while testifying about this and mentioned she was likely on cocaine at the time of that alleged threat.
So putting all this together, beyond the absolutely terrifying balcony claim, her testimony adds layers. Alleged surveillance, alleged knife incident, the direct threat, plus this whole backdrop of heavy drug use. How does this fit the prosecution's narrative?
Well, it seems to reinforce their argument about an alleged pattern, right? Controlling behavior with the texting, potential violence with the knife, explicit threats with the "unalive you" comment, and then the balcony incident is this extreme claim of physical harm, of terror.
And the drug use is just woven throughout her account of that environment.
Exactly. Okay, let's go back to the balcony incident itself, the details. She said she was there with Cassie and Cassie's ex-girlfriend.
Yes, that's what she testified. At an apartment, she clarified, which had a balcony. Apparently, her lawsuit initially said a hotel, so that was one point of clarification.
Okay, at an apartment, they were doing drugs.
She said yes, they were doing drugs. She was sleeping on the couch with the ex. When Combs arrived, she testified she took the ex into the bathroom, sort of to shield her from whatever was happening. Then she went out onto the balcony. Said she was about to light a blunt.
And that's when Combs allegedly came out.
That's her testimony.
Yeah.
She said he came up behind her, lifted her up, put her on the railing.
On the railing of a 17th floor balcony.
Yes. And yelled, "You know what the F you did?" She replied she didn't know what he meant. She claims he held her there, over the edge, essentially, for the time it took to have that back and forth repeating it.
How long would that be? Seconds? A minute? Still terrifying.
The source quotes her as saying, for the time it took to say that repeatedly. So maybe not extended time, but certainly long enough to be absolutely horrifying.
Yeah.
Then, she testified, he threw her back onto the balcony furniture.
Did she say she was injured?
Yes. Said she didn't realize right away, but later saw a large bruise on her leg. Described it as having a piercing mark in the middle, plus back and neck pain.
Were there photos?
Apparently.
Yeah.
Photos of the leg bruise and a neck brace she said she wore were shown in court while she was testifying.
And what about Cassie? How did Cassie react, according to Bangolan?
Bangolan testified. Cassie said something like, "Did you just hang her over the balcony?"
Wow. And the source mentioned Mr. Combs' reaction in the courtroom during this part.
Yeah, just noted that while she was testifying about the incident and the injuries and the photos were shown, he reportedly watched the monitor and spoke to his lawyer. Just an observation from the courtroom.
She also talked about getting sober.
She did. Testified she got sober January 2nd, 2018. Said she has the date tattooed. And she linked that decision to an 8-hour ketamine session she apparently had with Combs and Cassie in Miami.
Okay. And she currently has a lawsuit against Combs, right?
Yes, a $10 million lawsuit filed late last year in LA State Court. When asked why, she reportedly said it was to seek justice for what happened to me on the balcony.
Did she talk about the lawsuit process? Lawyer.
Yeah, she mentioned hiring and then firing a lawyer named Tyrone Blackburn. Said he sent demand letters she didn't approve of because they were incorrect, and that he picked the high demand amount, not her. She also mentioned declining some kind of offer that allegedly came via a producer friend of Mr. Combs.
Okay, so a lot there. Now, the cross-examination of Brianna Bangolan, this sounds like it was intense.
The source definitely portrays it that way. Defense attorney Nicole Westmoreland handled it, and her style was described very differently.
How so?
Aggressive.
Yeah.
The source used the term thundering voice, a real contrast to the other defense lawyers they'd observed.
And what was her main strategy in cross-examining Bangolan?
Seems like it was a full frontal assault on her credibility, heavily focusing on her admitted drug use, especially with Cassie.
Right, trying to undermine her memory and truthfulness.
Exactly. The source says Westmoreland spent about 15 minutes just drilling down on the drug use, asking if they used a lot of drugs, if they had a serious drug problem, even calling it a drug partnership, implied she sold hundreds of pills to Cassie. So, painting her as an unreliable narrator due to extensive admitted drug use. A common tactic, but sounds like it was pursued very forcefully here.
Very. trying to impeach her credibility, make the jury doubt everything she said, suggesting her memory is shot, maybe her motives are questionable because of the lawsuit.
Did Westmoreland bring up inconsistencies in her story?
Oh, yeah. Numerous ones, according to the report.
Like what?
Well, that balcony location hotel versus apartment. Westmoreland reportedly pressed her on whether she'd previously denied certain details or maybe said Cassie didn't see her over the balcony. Bangolan's responses were often, I don't remember, or I don't remember that.
Using memory lapses against her.
Right. Also, small things like whether she was smoking a cigarette or weed on the balcony, contrasting her testimony with the legal complaint, things like that.
And the alleged threat, the unalive you comment.
That came up again, yes. The defense pointed out it reportedly wasn't mentioned in her first meeting with government investigators.
Suggesting it was added later.
Right. That it did appear in a later demand letter from her former lawyer. They also highlighted an alleged discrepancy. The demand letter supposedly said the threat happened while she was hanging over the balcony.
But she testified it happened earlier at the photo shoot.
Correct. She testified he did both things, threatened her and held her over the balcony, but just not at the same time. Westmoreland highlighted that difference between the letter and the testimony.
Okay. Hitting any perceived inconsistencies.
Sure.
Anything else?
Westmoreland asked if she'd told the government about knife fights, plural, which Bangolan reportedly didn't remember saying. And maybe significantly, the lawyer questioned whether it was Bangolan's lawyer, not Bangolan herself, who had claimed in filings that Mr. Combs essayed her on the balcony.
And what did Bangolan say to that?
She reportedly replied, my lawyer said that.
Wow. Okay. So the defense is suggesting maybe claims were added or exaggerated by lawyers, not necessarily coming directly from her initial account. That cross-examination sounds absolutely brutal.
It does. Really seems designed to just chip away at every single piece of her testimony, to suggest her memory is unreliable because of drugs or that the story changed over time, perhaps influenced by the lawsuit.
That's the goal, right? Create enough reasonable doubt about her account, her motivations, her reliability, that the jury simply can't trust what she said, especially those really explosive allegations. The heavy focus on drugs is central to that strategy.
So day 16, wow, according to our source, just incredibly dense. We had these hints of alleged cover-up attempts from the day 15 recap.
Right, the money, the IDs.
Then the technical expert Piazza analyzing that graphic video footage, acknowledging glitches, but ultimately standing by its accuracy.
Followed by the defense trying to pick apart that accuracy.
And then Brianna Bangolan's testimony, just that shocking core claim about the balcony, layered with threats, other alleged incidents, the drug use.
And immediately followed by that intense, aggressive cross-examination aiming to completely dismantle her credibility.
It really shows you, doesn't it, the different kinds of evidence courts deal with. Technical, financial, and then these deeply personal, often traumatic eyewitness accounts.
Absolutely. And it shows how everything gets tested, the evidence is presented, and then it's immediately challenged. You see legal strategies playing out in real time, attempts to build a narrative versus attempts to poke holes in it. Understanding these trials means looking at all of it, the substance of the claims, the corroborating evidence, and the challenges to that evidence and the witnesses. And considering things like trauma, memory, motivation, it all gets put under the microscope.
It really puts into perspective just how difficult it must be for a jury to weigh everything. It's not just hearing one story. It's hearing a story, seeing evidence sometimes contradictory, and then watching that story get pulled apart and questioned from every angle.
Exactly. Which brings us to maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. Considering everything we've unpacked from day 16, the conflicting accounts, the technical debates about video accuracy, the really aggressive challenges to a witness's credibility, focusing on drug use and inconsistencies, what does this deep dive really highlight about just how hard it can be to determine the absolute truth in complex legal cases like this, especially when it's all playing out so publicly? How do you navigate and process this kind of conflicting, challenging information when you encounter it?
That's a really challenging question to end on. Definitely something to think about. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us into what sounds like a very, very intense day of testimony.